My name is Daniel Hale. I'm 35, a structural engineer by trade, the kind of person who spends his days making sure weight is carried fairly and nothing buckles when pressure shows up. I grew up in Oregon, first in my family to finish college, and I've been told all my life I'm the responsible one. If you've heard that line enough times, you already know the shape of what came next. Christmas morning at my parents' house in Portland had the familiar soundtrack of an old home. The furnace clicking on a pipe tapping somewhere in the wall, my mother humming while she fluffed the same artificial tree she's used for years. The room smelled like bottled pine and cinnamon rolls just starting to warm. The sky outside was that winter gray that never quite decides to be daylight. My father kept gravitating to the front window arms folded chin high the way men of his generation stand beside a brand new purchase. When my sister Brooke came down the stairs in a rush of perfume and bangles, he couldn't wait another second. "Come outside," he said, already reaching for the door. There it sat in the driveway, white paint polished to a mirror, a dealership-sized red bow perched on the roof like a billboard. My mother put a hand to her mouth. My father announced the model and the trim as if he'd earned a commission. Brooke did a little spin that made the bow quiver, and for a moment the whole block seemed to be watching from behind their curtains. They love an audience, my parents. The rest of the gifts happened back inside after the applause. I sat near the glass-top coffee table and reached for the package with my name on it, neat corners tape pressed flat the way my mother likes things. Inside was a plastic piggy bank, glossy and pink, the kind you buy for a child to teach the sound of coins. My father laughed like we were in on a joke together. "Seed money for your house fund," he said. My mother chimed in. "You're so good with money you don't need much." I pulled the rubber stopper and 2 crisp $1 bills fluttered onto the glass. Paper makes a particular sound on a hard surface, a soft hiss, then quiet. Some numbers are louder than others. I'd driven down the night before from Seattle, 3 hours if you take your time, longer if you stop for gas and coffee. I can still feel the wheel in my palms and see the way taillights smear red in the rain. In that line at the convenience store south of Olympia, I had rehearsed a few sentences about work. Nothing dramatic, just good news. I thought they might be proud to hear when the moment felt right. The moment passed without looking at me. Across the room, the gifts I'd brought them were stacked in a sensible row. The leather briefcase my father admired in a storefront. The slender silver bracelet my mother lingered over in a catalog, the camera lens Brooke said would help with a client shoot. Those weren't grand gestures, just the kind of steady giving a responsible son does. Because that's how he was raised. Brooke settled onto the couch beside me and lifted the key fob to the window so the car would wink its lights. My mother started composing a photo in her mind, angling the bow against the wreath on the door. My father was already talking about warranty packages and interest rates with the satisfaction of a man who's sure he made the right choice. No one asked about the drive. I took a sip of coffee and set the mug next to the plastic hog. The steam left a small oval on the glass that vanished almost as soon as it formed. There are ledgers in every family, some record dollars, some record attention. Ours always kept both, and the totals never looked the same on our 2 lines. I turned the piggy bank in my hands, felt the seam along its belly, and set it back down. The table gave a hollow tap I felt more than heard. Enough, I thought, clear-level adult. If you've been the dependable one long enough, you know the precise second a pattern stops being how it is and becomes what it does to you. Everything that followed later that day started with that sound on the glass. The tap of that plastic on glass didn't come from nowhere. It echoed a pattern I'd learned to read long before I could read blueprints. If part 1 was the moment I recognized the shape, what follows is how the lines were drawn in the first place. When we were kids, birthdays set the tone. Brooke got the kind of fifth birthday you still see in photo albums, rented ponies in the cul-de-sac, a castle cake that took 2 adults to carry goodie bags with ribbon handles. The whole neighborhood showed up, and my mother floated through it all with the satisfaction of a well-run parade. The next year, when I turned 6, there was cake from the grocery store bakery in a white box with a see-through window and 2 classmates whose parents could stay only until pickup. Nobody was unkind. They just called me independent and patted my shoulder as if self-sufficiency were a party theme. Senior year told the story in a different language. I had valedictorian taped in a folder with other things that mattered only if someone noticed: a scholarship letter, a congratulatory note from a teacher who'd written the recommendation that made a difference. My parents' seats were empty at graduation because Brooke's JV team had an away game and someone needed to drive and cheer. People told me afterward that families get spread thin and that's just life. Maybe it is. But when you're 18, a row of empty chairs looks like a paragraph that ends in a period where you were expecting an exclamation point. College framed the difference in dollars and cents. My award letter started with the word loans. Her award letters started with the word grant and ended with a transfer that covered not just tuition, but the extras that smoothed rough edges, housing, a meal plan upgraded beyond the basics, travel money for studio visits. When she decided to find inspiration in Europe for a year, the money moved quietly and efficiently, deposits paid tickets. Bought a short-term sublet in Portland, arranged for her return. I can say that without guessing because I was the one who kept the paper moving at home. Once I was 19 and filing my own return, my father realized I was good with forms and numbers and asked if I would help with theirs. Help meant I sat at the dining table with a box of receipts and a calculator while he watched the ball game, and later I learned what every line meant. I saw the tuition checks with my parents' names on them for Brooke's school, the 1098-T forms that didn't have my name anywhere, and the bank transfers that lined up with the dates on her flight confirmations. After our grandmother passed, I organized her estate file, death certificate, life insurance payout. The small inheritance that arrived in a cashier's check. I tracked when that landed and what went out in the months that followed. I'm not assigning malice to the ledger, only describing it as it was. Money was available when Brooke reached for it, and it was credit and work study when I did. It took time before I understood that paying a bill is a kind of language too. The family line about me being good with money was another way of saying the safety net would be fitted under someone else. The car piece slid into place when I started my first job. I could afford the used Toyota on my own, but my insurance quote at 22 made my eyes water. My father offered to co-sign for a better rate, and on paper he did me a favor. In practice, it put my coverage on a policy he managed. Every renewal came to his mailbox, and any questions from the insurer went to his phone first. He never missed a chance to remind me of the discount I got because he'd put his name next to mine. I told myself at the time that families do this, that it's how you get launched when you're young and still proving yourself. But even then I heard the hinge in the offer, the sense that what's yours might be considered ours if a day arrived when that was convenient. It's easier to forgive a single slight than a written history, and I had the history in manila folders with my handwriting on the tabs. So when the piggy bank rattled and 2 bills sighed onto the coffee table that morning, it wasn't a surprise. It was the most recent entry in a ledger I'd been balancing for years. At some point that evening, the house quieted the way old houses do. Heat cycling down the refrigerator, humming to itself, rain pushing lightly at the windows. I lay awake and realized there wasn't going to be a better time to step away than while everyone still believed this day proved something. I sat up, swung my feet to the floor, and made a simple list in my head: take only what belongs to the life I've earned. Leave everything that ties me to expectations I didn't agree to. I packed in silence. My grandmother's wristwatch went into my shirt pocket. It was the only thing she ever told me to keep close because it had kept good time through worse years than these. The photo album from college slid into the suitcase not for nostalgia, but because it reminded me of the promises I made to myself when the ink on those acceptance letters was still fresh. The first blueprint I ever stamped with my own seal went into a cardboard tube. It isn't a trophy so much as proof that I can make something stand when wind and weight try to make it fail. The expensive gifts I'd brought for the family stayed lined up beneath the tree. Let them be what they were intended to be. Not bargaining chips, not apologies, just gifts. In the kitchen, the digital clock on the stove clicked from 1:59 to 2:00. I set my house key on the shelf by the coffee maker where my father keeps the filters so no one would miss it when morning routines kicked in. On a sticky note I wrote, "I'm safe. I need space. Dan." It was the kind of message you leave when you're not asking permission or forgiveness. I took one last look at the rooms I knew by sound more than by sight. Picked up my bag and let the front door close behind me without letting it slam. The rain had deepened to a steady sheet, the sort that turns streetlights into halos and makes every surface shine. I drove south on I-5, wipers thudding a slow metronome while the car found its way through the spray. Past the city limits, the highway opened and the trucks took over the landscape, long lines of taillights marching into the dark. Somewhere north of Eugene, a semi in the center lane threw a wall of water across my windshield as it drifted right without signaling. For a breath, I saw nothing but white, then the vague red smear of brake lights. I eased off the gas, felt the tires hold, and steered a clean line back into my lane. The calm that came after surprised me. Not relief exactly. More like confirmation that I could keep this car straight without someone else's hand on the wheel. Near first light, I pulled into a diner with a neon sign that had blinked open through more winters than I could count. Inside, the heat wrapped around me, and the smell of coffee and bacon did what it always does at that hour, told you you're still among the living. I took a booth by the window. The waitress topped off a mug without asking and called me hon in a voice that didn't require a story. 10 minutes later, a state trooper walked in, shook the rain from his hat, and asked the counterman something quiet. He came to my table the way professionals do when they're there to check a box and not to make trouble. "Mr. Hale," he asked, and I nodded. "We had a call from your folks asking for a welfare check. Mind if I see some ID?" I handed over my license and let him note the plate number from the registration I keep folded above the visor. He glanced at the address at me, then back at the form. "You okay this morning?" he asked. "I am," I said. "I left a note." He nodded like he'd heard that sentence before on harder nights. "All right, I'll log that you're safe and not missing. You'll probably want to reach out when you're ready so they don't keep calling." He set a business card on the table with an incident number and wished me a better day than the weather. As he stepped back into the rain, I took a sip of coffee that had gone from hot to just right and felt the first useful quiet settle in. Whatever else would need explaining could wait. I had miles to make, and for the first time in a long time, no one to ask permission from to make them. The trooper's taillights disappeared into the rain, and the diner settled back into its small morning sounds, the kind that make a person remember there's a world that runs on coffee and habit no matter what your family is doing. The waitress came by with the pot, a woman with silver in her hair and a name tag that read Gloria. She topped off my cup, looked at the note the officer had left on the table, and said in a voice that had poured comfort across 1,000 bad mornings, "Blood makes you related. Love and respect make you family." She didn't linger to see if it landed. She just moved along to the next booth, and the sentence stayed where she'd put it. My phone buzzed. Marcus. He and I came up through the same company, different cities, same deadlines and jokes about engineers getting blamed when physics wins. I almost let it go to voicemail and then answered because the only thing worse than being human is pretending you want to be. He listened first, which is the thing that separates a friend from an audience. No grand advice, no. Have you tried seeing it their way? Just space for me to lay out the immediate facts. I'm fine, I left a note. I need a place to park my thoughts somewhere quiet, he said. Come down here. I've got a spare room for a week too if you need it. Our San Francisco office has been asking for help on a retrofit. I can put your name in front of the right person. If you decide you don't want it after a conversation, fine, but at least talk to them. I looked out at the lot where the rain stitched lines across the asphalt and thought about the difference between running and moving with purpose. I don't want to make a scene, I said. Then don't, he answered. Show up, rest, think. Keep your phone on for me and off for the rest. You don't owe anybody a performance. Gloria slid a plate onto the table, eggs, toast, bacon that snapped when you looked at it. And I realized she'd taken the liberty because sometimes strangers can tell when you forgot to feed yourself. I texted Marcus my live location and said I'd keep it on while I was on the road. He sent back the address and a short list of common sense instructions the way men do when they want to help without taking your keys. Stop if you're tired. Aim for daylight, don't argue with weather. I hesitated not because I doubted the destination, but because a lifetime of being the reliable one trains you to announce your departures like memos. The line from Gloria gave me the permission I hadn't thought to ask for, related as a fact printed on a certificate. Family is how people show up. If the showing up isn't there, you're allowed to go where it is. I told Marcus I'd make the leg to the state line, catch a few hours in a safe lot if the rain got ugly, and push on when the light came up. He said he'd keep his phone near the pillow and not to apologize for calling at any hour. We hung up and I ate what I could manage, not because I was hungry, but because planning works better on a steady hand. Before I paid, I asked Gloria for a pen. On the back of the trooper's card, I wrote 2 lines, the first for me, the second for anyone who asked, headed south to a friend. Safe and deliberate. Outside, the rain had softened. I set the phone on the dash with the live location glowing and pulled onto the highway, not to prove a point or to win an argument, but to take the kind of step a grown man takes when he decides to be responsible for where he stands. By late afternoon, the gray along the coast gave way to a clearer sky, and the bridge lines rose ahead like somebody had sketched them with a ruler. Marcus met me at his place with a spare key and the kind of welcome that doesn't ask for a backstory. His guest room had a clean bed, a chair by the window, and a lamp with a steady switch. It felt like a landing strip. We ate simple food, talked shop, just enough to remind ourselves who we are when no one is keeping score, and I slept hard for the first time in days. Monday morning, I opened my laptop at his kitchen table and wrote an email to HR that said exactly what it needed to and nothing more. Request to transfer from Seattle to San Francisco available immediately, portfolio attached. I laid out the project experience that matched what I knew this office had on its docket and hit send before I could decorate it with apologies. 3 business days later, the reply came back, formal and kind, transfer approved. Start date the following Monday. A line at the bottom welcomed me to the team, which read better than any family slogan I'd heard in years. With that settled, I went looking for a place that would be mine and quiet. Andrea, a property manager a friend of Marcus knew from book club, showed me a 1-bedroom in a pre-1979 building that still carried the bones of decent craftsmanship. 650 square feet, wood floors that had been refinished but not erased, west-facing windows that let the afternoon pour in like it meant it. The lease was short, to start, the kind you agree to when you want options, and rent control meant the ground under my feet wouldn't move faster than I could think. Andrea handed me a blank move-in checklist and didn't try to sell me on anything. I signed because it felt like a room where a person could hear himself think. The next chore was the kind that steadies a man. I called my insurer, gave my policy number, and asked to separate my coverage from any household accounts. The representative read the file and said my car's title listed one owner, me. We set up a new policy in my name only with an effective date that afternoon, and she emailed the ID cards before we hung up. A quick call to the DMV confirmed the registration matched the title. If anyone tried to make mischief with words like stolen, the records would not agree with them. From there, I walked into a bank where the pens are still chained to their stands and opened a new checking account. I moved my direct deposit set fresh passwords and went through my list of auto pays like a man pruning a tree cabin utilities off family subscriptions. Off anything that tugged money through old channels off. At a phone store around the corner, I chose a new number and let the clerk transfer what needed keeping contacts, photos that were mine and no one else's. The calls I wanted would find me. The rest could ring in empty rooms for all I cared. On the calendar, I penciled in something I'd avoided for years. An appointment with a therapist whose name Marcus had heard from a neighbor he trusted. Dr. Grant Winters shook my hand, sat down without fuss, and asked what brought me in. I told him I needed to put accurate names to what had felt normal for too long and to learn how to say no without turning it into a courtroom speech. We set 2 goals in plain English: identify where favoritism had shaped my decisions and build boundaries I could state in a sentence and keep without an audience. He suggested weekly sessions for a season, some homework that didn't look like a worksheet, a simple measure of progress, less explaining, more choosing. I left his office with a follow-up on the books and a steadier pulse than when I walked in. It turns out there's a particular kind of quiet that comes from clean paperwork, a lease with your name, a title that says what it should, a number only friends have. It doesn't fix everything. It does make a man feel like he's standing on something that won't shift under his feet. The calm that came from clean paperwork didn't solve anything by itself, but it gave me enough room for a routine to grow. I started with 2 anchors that didn't require speeches. On Tuesday evenings, I walked into a community center basement that smelled like coffee and old gym varnish and took a chair in a men's accountability group. No one tried to fix anyone. We went around the circle with simple rules: say your name, say one thing you did this week that moved your life forward, say one thing you'll do before we meet again. When it was my turn that first night, I kept it plain. I'm Dan. I transferred offices. Before next Tuesday, I'll set up my apartment enough to cook in it. A retired firefighter nodded like I'd said something larger. An older farmer who'd moved to the city to be near grandkids told me he'd bring me a spare skillet. That's how it worked in that room. Less talk, more doing. On Saturdays, I learned to center clay. The community college held a weekend pottery class in a sunlit room that faced the courtyard. The instructor was a woman with gray at her temples and the quiet authority of someone who has taught people to keep their hands steady for a long time. She showed us how to brace our elbows, how to lean our weight into the heel of a hand without forcing it, how to feel when the lump stopped fighting. The wheel hummed. Clay pushed back. My mind for once did not run ahead to the next crisis. A cylinder became a bowl with uneven walls and a lip that wavered like a coastline, and it was the most honest thing I'd made in months. Let the piece tell you what it wants to be, she said. And I wrote that sentence on an index card for my kitchen wall. Work gave the other half of the structure. The Richardson Tower retrofit needed another engineer who was willing to be on site more than behind a desk. First day, I put on a hard hat and walked the stair cores with the superintendent, counting bolt patterns along the existing steel, measuring where new plates would land, and checking how much cover we had on the concrete to avoid hitting what shouldn't be hit. The drawings called for added collectors on the roof, diaphragm drag struts tying the elevators back to stiffened sheer walls, and a set of dampers tucked where tenants would never think to look. Out on the 10th floor, a carpenter showed me where a sleeve had wandered an inch from the dimension. We solved it there, not later in email. Down on the loading dock, I signed off on the epoxy anchors after the pull test hit the spec. The inspector grunted his approval and I grunted mine, and by lunch the crew understood I wasn't there to impress anyone. I was there to make sure the building would do its job when the ground tried to take it apart. Respect came the way it usually does among people who work with weight. I learned names showed up when the crane did and didn't flinch when someone told me I'd drawn a line that couldn't be built. We reworked what needed reworking and left the rest alone. By the second week, the foreman was calling me engineer without the smile that says it's a joke. Marcus kept his distance in the way a good friend does. He checked once to make sure the spare key worked and then let me run my own life. Once or twice a week, he'd text a short invitation to dinner or a ball game on television, nothing loaded, no questions tucked between the lines. He passed my name to the project lead and then stepped back. When I thanked him, he said, "You're the one doing the work," and changed the subject to whether the Giants would find a bullpen this year. By the time the second pottery bowl came out of the kiln, its glaze a better blue than I deserved, my apartment had a pan on the stove and a calendar on the wall. Tuesday nights in the basement, Saturdays at the wheel, weekdays in a building that would stand taller because we tightened the right bolts. It wasn't therapy that saved me, and it wasn't a dramatic speech. It was a set of ordinary choices repeated until they felt like a life. Respect at work grew in small, steady ways, and with it came a quieter mind. That's when the noise found a new route. A colleague forwarded a screenshot from LinkedIn. Two distant cousins had posted vague prayers for a loved one going through a breakdown, and my name was tagged under a chain of comments that treated rumor as diagnosis. An old neighbor messaged asking if I'd been let go and whether I needed help getting back on my feet. By evening, 3 relatives I hadn't heard from in years had sent stern notes about honoring your parents as if they were reading from the same script. The next night, my phone lit with a family group video call. I considered letting it pass, then answered because silence can be mistaken for consent. My mother's face filled the screen, first carefully composed and wounded at once. My father stood behind her with the posture of a man ready to deliver a verdict. Brooke hovered at the edge, uneasy. My mother started with a statement, not a question. "You made a major life decision without discussing it with us." My father added, "Family talks before it acts." I let the words settle the way you let dust fall before you sweep. Then I said what I had practiced saying without anger. "I need distance from disrespect, not from the idea of family." They blinked as if they'd heard a foreign language. My mother took offense at the word disrespect and listed the things they'd done for my own good, most of which involved telling me what I should want. My father cut in. "You owe your mother an apology for the way you left, and you owe me one for the way you're talking now." I kept my tone level. I left a note. "I told you I was safe. I'm not having a conversation where the price of speaking is apologizing for having boundaries." He leaned closer to the camera, voice low. "Then this conversation is over until you apologize." "All right," I said, and pressed end. The quiet that followed wasn't triumphant. It felt like setting a beam correctly and walking away before you overwork it. 10 minutes later, I opened my laptop and did what has always steadied me. I wrote things down. The email went to both my parents and Brooke's subject line. Contact going forward. I kept it short and specific. I stated that I would not discuss my address, finances, or personal property by phone, that any communication should be by email so we all have a clear record, that I would not accept surprise visits, that I was unavailable for calls after 6 p.m., and that any requests for help must include the exact need, the amount, and a date, and would likely be declined. I added one paragraph that mattered most: I will not participate in conversations that question my sanity or speculate about my employment. If I see that kind of talk on social media or hear it secondhand, I will pause contact for 30 days. The last lines were plain: I'm willing to speak when we can do it with respect. If you can't manage that right now, don't respond until you can. I signed my name, CC'd my own alternate address, and filed the message in a folder labeled Family Boundaries so I could find it when memory tried to soften the edges. Within an hour, Brooke replied with a single sentence: I hear you, and nothing else. My mother sent a longer note about hurt feelings and hope for healing that never once used the word respect. My father didn't write at all. I turned off the phone, washed a plate, and set tomorrow's clothes over the chair. In the morning, I would be on site early, where bolts have specs and lines meet where they're drawn. Boundaries, like buildings, don't stand because you say the word. They stand because you set them, check them, and refuse to hang extra weight on them just to keep the peace. 2 days after I sent the boundary email, an ivory envelope arrived at my apartment, heavy paper that felt like it wanted to be taken seriously. Inside was my cousin Vanessa's wedding invitation: formal script, church at 4. Reception at a garden venue across town. I set it on the counter and let the details settle like rebar in a form. Family events have their own loads. The trick is to plan the supports before you walk in. I RSVP'd yes on the website, then opened a new tab and booked a hotel 3 blocks from the reception. Not the family rental house, not a couch, just a quiet room with good locks and a desk where a man can lay out his notes. I texted Vanessa to say I'd be there and to thank her for including me. No calls. Low contact works best when it's consistent and courteous. A week later, the wedding coordinator sent a group email with a PDF of the seating chart for final checks. I downloaded it, zoomed in, and saw my name slotted between my parents at table 3 across from my sister. You don't walk into a room like that and expect conversation to hold. I took a breath and wrote a short, polite note to the coordinator and copied Vanessa so there'd be no surprises. Thanks for the update. May I be moved to a table with cousins, perhaps table 7 or 8? So the evening flows smoothly for everyone. Grateful for your help. I kept it professional, made no speech, and hit send. 5 minutes later, the coordinator responded with a simple, "Of course, done." I saved both emails as PDFs in a folder marked Wedding Logistics. Paper remembers what memory sometimes edits. With logistics steady, I turned to preparation. If there was going to be a conversation with my parents, it would be orderly and factual, or it wouldn't happen at all. I bought 2 identical black binders and a box of tab dividers. On the first page of each, I typed a 1-page index, clear as a set of shop drawings. Section A, photographs. Side-by-side childhood birthdays, high school ceremonies, family vacations. Section B, education, tuition statements, and scholarships. Section C, grandmother's estate timeline of deposit and disbursements. Section D, vehicle, BMW lease. Section E, transfers, payments I made on family expenses. Under A, I laid out the photographs like plan and elevation: Brooke's princess birthday with rented ponies and a 3-tier cake. My next year's sheet cake on a plastic tablecloth with 2 classmates. Her graduation with a full row of family. My graduation program with the line of seats reserved for parents and cousins marked unclaimed. Vacation snapshots where the camera loved one kid and recorded the other. Each pair sat on a page with dates typed in the footer so we wouldn't argue about what year a thing happened. Under B, I added copies of my loan statements from freshman through senior year. showing principal and interest, and next to them the 1098-T forms from Brooks College with parental payments highlighted. I kept account numbers masked. No one needs sensitive data to understand a pattern, but I left the dollar figures visible. Under C, I set a simple timeline for our grandmother's estate date of payout amount. Bank credited, then the outflows in the months after tuition, travel, and studio rent noted with check images or transfer confirmations. Each line had a date and a note in a clean column. People our age know that dates matter. They tell a story even when voices get loud. Under D, I inserted the printed BMW lease. Robert Hale listed as lessee, down payment circled, term length, monthly amount, and the clause about early termination highlighted. No commentary. A lease is a contract. It speaks plainly if you let it. Under E, I printed bank confirmations for transfers I'd made over the years, utility catch-ups, the cabin's winter bill, and insurance premium that somehow didn't get paid 1 July. Each entry got a brief label, date, amount, purpose. I finished both binders the way I finish a set of calculations. I checked totals, made sure page numbers matched the index, and added a cover sheet that read "for review if requested." I wasn't planning to brandish anything at a wedding, but if someone asked for the record, it would be available, calm and complete. I packed the binders flat at the bottom of my suitcase and put a clean notebook on top. I printed my hotel reservation and the updated seating confirmation and slid them into the inside pocket of my jacket. Then I set an alarm for my flight, texted Vanessa that I'd arrived the afternoon before, and went to sleep with the kind of quiet that comes when you know the documents are in order, and the evening will go the way a well-drawn plan goes, one measured step at a time. The flight landed on time, the hotel keycard opened on the first try, and by evening I was standing under a string of patio lights at the rehearsal dinner watching cousins cluster, like they always do, by decade, by history, by who remembers which version of which story. The room had that low hum of clinking flatware and careful laughter people use when they're deciding what can be said out loud. I kept to the edges. It didn't take long for the whispers to find me. Uncle Simon materialized with a plate he wasn't eating and a look that said he'd come on purpose. Cousin Tara trailed him, equal parts curious and protective. Simon spoke without preamble. "You should know before someone weaponizes it," he said, quiet enough to be kind. "Your dad's out at work, not a layoff he signed for things he shouldn't have. Personal guarantees, I'm told. House of Cards fell, and that car lease in his name. Payments slipped. It's gone." Tara added the part neighbors usually do. "Brooks driving a Honda now. Clients are thin. No one's saying it plainly in that corner, but the facts are sitting there." I nodded, not because I was unmoved, but because facts traveled better when you let them sit. The band tested a saxophone in the next room. I was still adjusting to the key when my father stepped between me and the buffet. He put a hand on my shoulder as if proximity made ownership. "Family sticks together," he said, the words shaped like a command. I met his eye. "If $2 is your definition of support," I said evenly, "we're using different dictionaries." He started a sentence about respect. I let it hang and didn't pick it up for him. My phone buzzed in my pocket and I glanced down out of habit. An email from HR flagged urgent. I excused myself to the hallway where the sound dropped to carpeted quiet and called the number in the signature. My HR rep sounded more apologetic than alarmed. "We received a call from someone identifying himself as a family member, asking about your employment status and well implying some instability. We did not disclose anything. I wanted you to be aware." I kept my voice level. "Thank you for the heads up. For the record, my file is current. If you receive further calls, please route to me in writing and note the date and time. I'm requesting that no information be released to third parties without my written consent." She agreed, documented it while we were on the phone, and wished me a calm evening. I scrolled once more to make sure my inbox said what I thought it did, then returned to the room where the salad had given way to roast chicken and speeches. Simon caught my eye and jerked his chin toward a quiet alcove. "One more thing," he said, and produced his phone. On the screen were screenshots of small transfers, $20 here, $35 there, from a payment app. I recognized the sender name, a harmless alias. Dates lined up with months when I'd covered something at home. "Brooke asked me once if there was a way to send you a little back without setting off fireworks," he said. I suggested a burner handle. She tried. "Your father found the app on a shared tablet and shut it down." Tara looked toward the doorway where Brooke stood talking to a bridesmaid, her posture not as carefree as it used to be. "She's not blameless," Tara said, "but she isn't blind either." The room toasted the couple. I lifted my glass with everyone else and felt the stakes click into a higher notch. My father was willing to reach into my professional life to regain the grip he'd lost. The car was never about transportation. It was about leverage and show. And Brooke, for all her part in the old script, had tried to send back something, however small, across a line she wasn't allowed to cross. I set my glass down, checked that the hotel card was still in my pocket, and made a note in my head. The way I do on a drawing, one more load path identified one more place where the structure would need to be stiffened before the real test. 40 minutes before the ceremony, my phone buzzed with a terse text, "We need to talk now." I replied with a time and a place I could control, the venue's library. High windows, old carpet, the smell of paper and lemon polish. A room designed for voices to stay measured. When they came in, my father tight-jawed, my mother clutching tissues, Brooke wary. I was already seated at a broad table with 2 identical black binders closed in front of me. "You asked for a conversation," I said. "We're going to have one quietly and with records." I opened the first binder and turned it so they could see. Page 1 carried paired photographs with dates in the footer, Brooke's costumed birthdays opposite my grocery box cakes. Her ceremony rows full opposite my empty seats. Vacations where one child dominated the frame and the other proved the camera worked. "This isn't nostalgia," I said, "it's pattern." The next section was simpler math. On the left, copies of my loan statements from freshman through senior year. On the right, the 1098-T forms and tuition receipts reflecting parental payments for Brooke, including the transfers that funded her year in Europe. Along the margin, I'd marked a timeline of when money was available, inheritance, deposited, promotions earned, and how it flowed. "I'm not assigning moral failure to dollars," I said. "I'm showing allocation." Under the tab labeled Vehicle, I slid out 2 sheets. "This is the BMW lease," I said, tapping the header. "Robert Hale, lessee. Down payment term, the clause on early termination highlighted. And this," I laid down the second, "is the title and current policy for my Toyota. One owner, one insured me. I confirm both this week with the DMV and my carrier. If anyone calls a false report to police about my car, the records will not support it. Please don't put yourselves in that position." I kept my tone even, not threatening, just factual. From my bag, I set a small jar on the table and loosened the lid. $2 bills slid out in a neat pile. "One for each week since Christmas," I said. "It's not a stunt. It's a ledger of self-respect, a reminder to me of what I will and won't accept." My mother's hand flashed across the table and tore at one of the photo pages, the paper ripping along the 3-hole line. She drew back as if shocked by her own motion. I kept my seat. "That's a copy," I said calmly. "The originals are scanned and backed up. We are not here to fight over paper." I turned another tab. "This part matters," I said, and laid down a 1-page timeline drawn from old files I'd organized years ago. Insurance explanations of benefits, hospital billing summaries, dates of outpatient therapy documents. none of us had looked at since the crisis passed. When Brooke was 8 after the accident, you lived inside fear for a long time. You spent to compensate to comfort. I understand where that started. My father's shoulders sagged a fraction. My mother's face went from defiant to pleading. Brooke stared at the table. But intent doesn't erase harm, I said. The pattern continued long after the cast came off and the bills stopped. It taught us each the wrong lessons. I closed the binder and put a typed sheet on top. Here are the terms for any contact going forward. We will read them out loud. If you agree, you'll sign. I'll photograph the signatures and email a copy when we're done. I read slowly. Family therapy with Dr. Grant Winters, 12 sessions over 3 months, including discussion of the childhood trauma that set this in motion. Boundaries, no borrowing, no smearing, no unannounced visits. Any financial communication, if ever needed, will come by email with an invoice attached. Enforcement: any violation triggers 12 months of no contact. Any smear must be retracted within 72 hours. My mother started to argue intent again. We were only trying, and I stopped her with a small shake of my head. Intent doesn't erase harm. I repeated, gentler this time. This is the only way the four of us talk without reopening the same wound. My father opened his mouth, ready to contest a clause, and Brooke put a hand on his sleeve. For a long breath, no one moved. Then my mother reached for the pen. We'll try, she said, voice unsteady but clear. My father signed because she had, and Brooke signed last and met my eyes. I took photos of the pages, slid the originals into the binder pockets, and stood. I'll email you the copy before the ceremony starts, I said. Thank you for agreeing. In the quiet that followed, I put the $2 bills back in their jar, closed both binders, and walked them to my bag. The room smelled like paper and lemon again. Outside, a string quartet tuned, and somewhere beyond the books, a wedding day went on schedule. The library door closed behind us, and 15 minutes later, the quartet struck its first clear note. I took my seat at a table with cousins and a couple of Vanessa's friends from work. The kind of mixed company that keeps conversation easy. There were toasts and the clink of forks on crystal, a first dance that made even the gruff uncles smile, and no scenes. I kept my jacket buttoned, shook hands when they were offered, and left on time for the short walk back to my hotel. Order held because I had given it something to hold on to. In the months that followed, consequences arrived the way weather does, steadily, without asking who deserved what. My father started going to AA at a church basement not far from the house they were preparing to sell. He didn't call to announce it. Brooke mentioned it in a brief text, and later he confirmed it without ornament. 90 days came and went. He still slipped into sermonizing when cornered, but the edge dulled, and for the first time in a long time he said, "I don't know," when he didn't. My mother kept her appointments with a therapist she chose herself. The difference showed up first in what she didn't say, fewer sentences that began with, "We only meant more," moments where she let silence do its work. As agreed, the four of us met with Dr. Winters on a schedule that would look respectable to a judge. 12 sessions in 3 months sounded like a lot on paper. In practice, it was enough to keep momentum without grinding us down. We set ground rules in the first meeting and kept them: 1 person talks at a time, no history beyond the page we're on, no fixing. Some weeks were harder than others. A few ended with nothing more dramatic than a handful of sentences that didn't land wrong. That was progress. Brooke began to move in ways that counted. She signed up for a financial literacy class at the community college, 3 evenings. Practical handouts, no theory that hid the point. Mornings, she pulled espresso at a cafe that opened at 6. Afternoons, she worked the back room at a print shop, collating catalogs and learning where paper jams hide. She texted me once on a Thursday, "Rent short, can I borrow just this once?" The kind of message that used to pull me into the old script. I took a breath, then answered the new way, "I don't lend money. Here are 2 links to resources and a simple budget template. If you want, I'll spend 30 minutes on Sunday helping you plan next month." She left it there. On Sunday, she took the call. We pulled up her bank app and wrote down every fixed expense, every variable. I showed her the simplest version of a plan: set aside the rent first, automate. The basics, give every dollar a job before it wanders off. She didn't like the numbers, but she didn't argue with them. A few weeks later, a notification pinged on my phone, $68.14 received from Brooke with a note. "For the July cabin bill you paid 2 summers ago." I'm sorry. No ask. It was a small amount on any ledger. It mattered because of the second sentence. I replied with a thumbs up in words and nothing for her to push against received. "Thank you." When she asked about envelopes and snowballing 2 store cards, I sent a 1-page outline and told her to pick whichever she would actually do. She chose the lower balance card first because she needed a win. That too was growth. Through all of it, my part stayed the same: compassion without rescue. When she texted a picture of a budget that didn't balance, I suggested trimming the discretionary line by the price of 1 latte a day, and didn't add the sermon about how the world works. When she considered a second-hand camera to replace the one she'd sold, I asked what the break-even point would be at her current client rate and left the arithmetic to make the point. With my parents, I kept the contact to the framework we'd signed. My father emailed once to say he'd reached 90 days and that the meetings made him listen more than he talks. I wrote back, "I'm glad. Keep going." My mother sent a note after session 8 that didn't ask for forgiveness and didn't assign blame. I saved it because it was the first message from her that felt like a bridge and not a summons. Nothing about this looked like television revenge. There was no bright flash where the score balanced to the penny. What there was week by week was the consequence of new rules kept firmly and quietly. And a sister learning the same lesson I was still learning. Love that respects a boundary is stronger than any favor that ignores one. By the time Christmas circled back, the new rules had turned into muscle memory. Workdays had their rhythm. Tuesday nights still belonged to the basement group, and the wheel at the ceramics studio spun out bowls that no longer wobbled. On Christmas Eve, I cooked in a kitchen that finally felt like mine, while Marcus brought over a pie and 2 friends from the job site showed up with folding chairs that didn't match anything and therefore matched everything. We ate at the small table by the west window and told the kind of stories people tell when they aren't competing for air. On the bookshelf behind us sat the pink piggy bank from a year ago. It wasn't a grievance anymore. I'd tucked a $2 bill into it every week since I left. The stack inside had become a map, 52 small markers that showed where self-respect had turned into practice. After dinner, we traded dish duty and game scores, and the apartment held that quiet talk you only get with people who know when to leave a pause alone. The mail was waiting when I walked back from seeing Marcus to the elevator, a padded envelope with my parents' return address. Inside was a letter written in my mother's hand, and signed by both of them, the pen strokes stiffer than I remembered. They didn't try to rewrite last winter. They named the pattern for what it was, admitted it had lasted too long, and wrote 2 sentences that mattered more than any flourish. "We are sorry for the ways we measured wrong. We are working to measure right." Tucked behind the letter was a check not large enough to suggest settling a score, but not symbolic either, meant as a start toward the tuition I had carried. I set both on the desk and looked out at the bay until the bridge lights came on. It would have been easy to feed the check into a private plan. Instead, I matched the amount from my own account and sent the full sum to a youth STEM scholarship fund at the community center where my group meets, with the donor line reading, "From the Hale family." Repair means more when it reaches beyond the four walls where the break began. I drafted an email to my parents before the impulse to over-explain could take over. I thanked them for the letter and for the effort it represented. I confirmed that I had received the check and told them exactly what I had done with it and why. I acknowledged the progress we'd made in our sessions and repeated the boundaries we had agreed to: written communication first. No surprise visits, no third-party inquiries about my work or health. I ended with a short invitation that didn't open more doors than it could hold. "I'm open to continued contact on these terms. If you're not ready, wait until you are." I CC'd Brooke, who replied later with a simple "good call" and a photo of a grocery envelope labeled "January rent" in her handwriting. The next day, the apartment filled again. Marcus with coffee, two neighbors with cinnamon rolls, a foreman from Richardson Tower who insisted he couldn't stay and then did. We passed plates and I told the PG version of the donation story. No one cheered. They nodded and asked about the scholarship's application dates. That was the right scale for the moment. When the last chair folded and the sink cleared, I carried the piggy bank to the mantel and tapped it lightly with a knuckle. The sound was fuller than last year. I didn't need to count what was inside to know what it represented. Later on the balcony, the air had that December clarity that makes lights look nearer than they are. The bridge threw its reflection across the water and a tug pushed a line of ripples toward shore. I set my phone to do not disturb and let the quiet lay down around me. It's tempting to think value comes from whatever gets wrapped in a bow and presented with a speech. A year taught me something steadier: value isn't assigned by a gift. It's protected by boundaries and proven by evidence. I stood there until the wind made me reach for a jacket, then went back inside to the room with the pig, the bowls, the clean desk, and the life I had chosen piece by piece. If you stayed with me to the end, thank you. What carried me through wasn't rage, it was proof and boundaries. If that speaks to you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, so you don't miss the next story about choosing self-respect. When the script says sit down and take it. Now I'd like to hear from you. What was your $2 moment, the small slight that finally showed you the whole pattern? If you were in my shoes, would you have picked the wedding library to lay out the binders or walked away without a word? Do you believe decades of favoritism can be repaired with therapy and clear rules, or is distance the only cure that holds? Should I have kept that check or donated it the way I did if you've weathered family storms? Especially if you've got a few more birthdays behind you than ahead. Your perspective matters here. Leave a comment with what worked, what didn't, and the one boundary you wish you'd set sooner. If this story helped you find your footing, share it with a friend who needs the nudge. And if you want more calm, evidence-first revenge arcs like this, where the payoff is a life that stands, hit subscribe. Your stories in the comments shape what we tell next, so add your voice below and I'll see you in the next episode.